In 1978, Sean Hepburn Ferrer came home. He was 18 years old. He found his mother in bed, eyes bloodshot, a bottle of sleeping pills beside her. The woman the world adored as a symbol of elegance and grace had just tried to end it all. That night, Audrey Hepburn confessed to her teenage son the darkest secrets of her marriage: infidelities, humiliations, a husband who had been photographed with more than 200 different women while she quietly raised their children. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad, her granddaughter Emma would say years later. But the tragedy of that night was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the most famous smile in cinema was a little girl who had almost starved to death during the war, with parents who sympathized with Hitler, a father who abandoned her to join the fascists, and a trauma so deep it would haunt her until her last breath. Her name was Audrey Kathleen Hepburn, and what Hollywood did to her was a crime no one ever paid for. This is the investigation the film industry buried for decades. Today you're going to discover 4 things that change everything you thought you knew about her. First, there is a photograph taken in Munich in 1935. It shows Audrey's parents standing next to Adolf Hitler, a photo that sat in a silver frame on her mother's mantelpiece for years. Second, Anne Frank's diary. Audrey read it and marked it herself. In its pages, she found something that shattered her forever, something that connected her to that Jewish girl in a way no one could have imagined. Third, the confessions her son Sean made public decades after her death. What he revealed about that night is devastating. And fourth, the gifts Audrey gave on her last Christmas: 3 winter coats, and the words she spoke as she handed them over. Words that still make people cry when they hear them. I'm going to tell you when each of these revelations arrives. If you leave before the end, you'll miss the part her family has tried hardest to keep quiet. Let's start at the beginning, with the secret Hollywood manufactured to protect her. When Audrey won the Oscar for Roman Holiday in 1953, Hollywood's publicity machine kicked into gear. They fabricated a perfect story: daughter of an international banker, aristocratic Dutch mother, European elegance, refined nobility, a dream backstory for a dream star. It was a lie. The truth was much darker. Audrey's parents, Baroness Ella van Heemstra and Joseph Victor Anthony Rustin, were active members of the British Union of Fascists. They didn't just sympathize with Nazism. They had met Hitler in person, dined with his associates, applauded his speeches. Remember this detail. You're going to need it. In May 1935, when Audrey was just 6 years old, her parents left her alone on her birthday. She was expecting a party, expecting presents, expecting her parents to hug her and sing to her. Instead, they traveled to Germany. They went with a delegation led by Oswald Mosley, the British fascist leader. They toured Nazi highways, factories, schools, workers' housing projects that showed off the progress of the Third Reich. Their guides showed them the future Hitler promised. The climax of the trip was a meeting at the Brown House in Munich, the Nazi Party headquarters. That's where they met Adolf Hitler. Baroness Ella was fascinated. Her eyes shone when she spoke about that encounter. She described Hitler as a man of vision, a charismatic leader, someone who understood what Europe needed. She was so impressed that a few months later she returned to Germany alone to witness the Nuremberg rallies. Thousands of torches lighting up the night, arms raised in the Nazi salute, and Ella in the crowd among them, applauding, thrilled, convinced she was witnessing the birth of a new world order. Afterwards, she wrote an enthusiastic article for the fascist magazine Black Shirt. "We have heard the call of fascism," she wrote in her own hand, "and we have followed the light on the upward path to victory." Those were the exact words of Audrey Hepburn's mother in 1935. Published, signed, documented. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad, and this was only the beginning of the reasons why. But what came next was even darker. Immediately after returning from Germany, that same month of May, Joseph Rustin abandoned his family. He left his wife crying for days, weeks on end, when she could barely get out of bed, and he left his 6-year-old daughter devastated. Audrey waited at the window every day, looking down at the street, hoping to see her father's figure coming toward the house. He never came. He didn't leave her for another woman. He left her for fascism. He devoted himself completely to the Nazi cause. He divided his time between the Belgian Fascist Party and the British Union of Fascists. He traveled constantly, attended clandestine meetings, handed out propaganda, while his daughter waited at home, asking when Daddy would come back. He never did. In 1938, the British Parliament investigated Joseph Rustin. He was accused of receiving money from Germans connected to Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, to fund an anti-Semitic propaganda newspaper in London. His business partners included a Nazi lawyer and a member of the Gestapo. In June 1940, when Britain went to war with Germany, Joseph Rustin was arrested. He was imprisoned as an enemy of the state under Regulation 18B for his active membership in the British Union of Fascists. They interned him on the Isle of Man for the duration of the war. Audrey Hepburn's father, jailed as a Nazi sympathizer. While other fathers fought Hitler, hers admired him. The abandonment by my father was the most traumatic event of my life, Audrey would confess decades later, voice breaking, eyes wet. It left a very deep scar in me. I loved my father more than any other man in my whole life. I spent years of my youth fantasizing that he would come back and explain everything. That it had all been a misunderstanding, that he loved us. He never did. Maybe you know that feeling too. Loving someone who abandoned you, carrying around an emptiness that never fills, looking for something you lost as a child in every relationship you have as an adult, waking up in the middle of the night wondering what you did wrong, what you could have done differently. Audrey felt that her entire life, if her father wounded her by leaving, her mother damaged her in another way, with emotional coldness, with words that cut like knives, with silences that lasted for days. My mother was not a very affectionate person, Audrey would recall years later, choosing each word carefully. She was a wonderful mother, but she'd had a very Victorian, highly disciplined upbringing. She was very strict, very demanding. She had a great deal of love in her, but she couldn't always show it. She couldn't always show it. Think about that for a moment. Her son Luca would later reveal something that explains everything. Audrey told him that during the war, her Aunt Misha was more of a mother to her than Ella. Misha was the kind one. She was the one who taught me to draw, to play, to read. She was the maternal figure. She was the one who hugged me when I cried. She dried my tears. My mother was the rules, the demands, the punishments. One of Ella's granddaughters would later remember. With Grandma, you had to watch your manners. She could be very strict. She always showed up with a serious face, almost like a mask of ice. I never saw her really laugh. But there was one sentence Audrey never forgot, a sentence that haunted her until her last day, a sentence that echoed in her head every time she received an award, every time the audience applauded. Her mother once looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Considering you have no talent, it's really quite extraordinary how far you've gotten." Imagine hearing that from your own mother after winning an Oscar, after conquering Hollywood, after millions of people adored you, after magazines called you the most elegant woman in the world. Considering you have no talent. The best kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. She carried those words like a stone on her chest. She was never able to reconcile herself with her mother's political beliefs. It was a subject they never discussed, a silence that lay between them like a slab of stone. Two women under the same roof, avoiding the most important conversation of their lives. But even that was nothing compared to what awaited her. When Germany invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, Audrey was 11 years old. She was a little girl studying ballet, dreaming of the stage, collecting pictures of famous dancers. Her English name made her suspicious in the eyes of the Nazis. German soldiers distrusted anything that sounded British. Her mother rebaptized her as Edda van Heemstra to protect her. She forbade her to speak English in public. She told her if anyone asked, she was Dutch, only Dutch. What followed were 5 years of horror. Audrey witnessed executions in the street. She saw German soldiers dragging men out of their homes, lining them up against walls, shooting them while their families watched, blood running down the cobblestones. She saw Jewish people being loaded into train cars to be deported, whole families, children crying and clinging to their mothers' skirts, old people shaking from cold and fear. Soldiers shoved them with rifle butts. I remember very vividly a small boy standing with his parents on the platform. She would recall years later, eyes lost in the past. Very pale, very fair, wearing a coat that was too big for him. And he got on the train. He didn't look back, he just got on. She never forgot that boy. For the rest of her life, she wondered what had happened to him. She heard the screams of resistance suspects being tortured in a building in central Arnhem. The cries pierced the walls, cries of pain, pleading, despair. And she would walk past on the street, trying not to hear, trying to keep going, trying to pretend everything was normal. On 15th of August 1942, the Nazis executed Audrey's uncle, Otto van Limburg-Stierum. He was a magistrate, a respected man, a man of law. He had refused to support the regime, refused to sign documents that would legitimize the occupation. They shot him along with 4 other prominent Dutchmen in retaliation for resistance activities. 5 gunshots, 5 bodies falling to the ground, a message to anyone who thought of resisting. That execution was the breaking point for Audrey's mother. The former admirer of Hitler finally opened her eyes. She saw with her own eyes what the regime she had admired so much was capable of. She saw it in the lifeless body of her brother-in-law. She saw it in the eyes of her sister, turned into a widow overnight. The Nuremberg rallies no longer looked so glorious. The torches didn't shine as brightly. The future Hitler had promised was built on corpses. But the damage was done. One of Audrey's half-brothers was deported to a German labor camp. He would spend years in inhuman conditions, never knowing if he would survive. The other spent the war hidden in cellars and barns, eating whatever he could find, trembling every time he heard German boots. And then the unforgivable happened. At 14, Audrey Hepburn joined the Dutch resistance, a teenage girl against the most powerful army in Europe. How many of us would have had that courage? She worked as a courier for Dr. Hendrik Baer, Huft, the local resistance leader. Because she spoke fluent English, she was the perfect messenger to help Allied pilots who had been shot down behind enemy lines. She hid messages in her shoes. The paper crinkled against her feet as she walked through streets watched by German soldiers. If they caught her, they would execute her and her whole family. But she kept walking, smiling at the soldiers, pretending to be just another teenage girl. She delivered the underground newspaper on her bicycle, pedaling along dirt roads, carrying BBC news the Nazis didn't want people to hear. News of hope, news that the war would one day end. She carried food to Allied pilots hiding in the woods. She crossed fields at night carrying a basket of food, knowing that if a soldier found her, everything would be over. Once, while picking wildflowers near the forest where pilots were hiding, Nazi soldiers approached her. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure they'd hear it. Her hands shook, her mouth went dry, but she stayed calm. With an innocent smile, she offered them an improvised bouquet. The soldiers laughed. They said something in German she pretended not to understand. They didn't bother her. They let her go. She walked away without turning back, without running, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to flee. She also danced. She performed in pitch-black nights, secret shows with the windows covered with thick blankets so the Nazis wouldn't see the light, wouldn't hear the music. People sat in silence, applauding without making noise, raising money for the resistance to hide Jews and other fugitives. Her family hid a British paratrooper in their cellar during the Battle of Arnhem. Every night, Audrey went down to bring him food. The soldier told her about England, about his family, about life before the war, and she promised him that someday it would all end. Every night she knew that if they were discovered, they would all be executed. But she kept going downstairs, kept bringing food, kept listening to his stories. But the worst hadn't even begun. After D-Day in June 1944, a spark of hope lit the Netherlands. The Allies were advancing. Liberation seemed close. The Dutch believed they would be free within weeks. Then the Dutch railway workers went on strike to limit Germany's ability to supply its troops. It was an act of massive resistance, an entire country saying, enough. 70,000 workers abandoned their posts. No Nazi train would run on Dutch territory. As retaliation, the Nazis blocked all food supplies to the Netherlands. What followed became known as the Hunger Winter, the cruelest winter Europe had ever known. It killed more than 20,000 people. Children who went to sleep and never woke up. Elderly people collapsing in the streets. Entire families found dead in their homes, huddled together for warmth. I went as long as 3 days without eating. Audrey would recall, eyes lost in the past. Most of the time, we lived on starvation rations. For months, breakfast was hot water and a slice of bread made from brown bean flour. Lunch broth was made from a single potato. There was no milk, no sugar, no grains of any kind. The family ate tulip bulbs, boiled grass, tree bark, dried leaves, roots dug up from the garden, whatever they could find, whatever could be chewed. Sometimes Audrey walked for miles searching for food, knocking on farmhouse doors begging. Sometimes they gave her something. Sometimes they sent her away empty-handed. She returned home with bleeding feet and an empty stomach. One night, while digging for roots in a park, she saw a family eating grass straight from the ground. A father, a mother, two small children chewing grass like animals. She never forgot that image. Audrey developed edema. Her legs swelled so badly she could barely walk. Severe anemia left her too weak to get out of bed. Jaundice turned her skin a sickly yellow. Respiratory infections made her cough blood. Chest infections wouldn't stop no matter what home remedies they tried. She weighed barely 40 kilograms on a 1.70-meter frame. Doctors later said she was weeks from dying, that if the war had lasted just a little longer, she wouldn't have survived. The malnutrition changed her body forever. Her bones, her organs, her metabolism, everything was marked. Her famously slender figure, the one the world celebrated as elegance, the one fashion magazines called perfect, the one millions of women tried to imitate with diets, was actually the permanent result of childhood starvation. "My body's not something you should aspire to," she would say sadly in an interview years later. "I ended up like this because I had no choice, because of a tragedy. When I see young women starving themselves to look like me, I want to cry. They don't know what they're doing." When the war ended in May 1945, humanitarian aid trucks arrived in the Netherlands. UNICEF and other organizations distributed food, milk, bread, chocolate. Audrey remembered all her life the first bite of chocolate she tasted after liberation. The flavor, the texture, the tears streaming down her face as she savored it. "That chocolate bar saved my life," she would say decades later. "UNICEF saved my life." It was a debt she would spend the rest of her days trying to repay. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. Audrey Hepburn had dreamed of becoming a prima ballerina. From the age of 5, she dreamed of stages. She practiced in her room, twirling in front of the mirror, imagining herself in a white tutu, under the lights, with thousands of people applauding. That dream kept her alive during the war. When she was hungry, she thought of ballet. When she was scared, she imagined dancing. It was her mental refuge, her safe place. But malnutrition stole that dream from her. After the war, she won a scholarship to study ballet with Marie Rambert in London, one of the most respected teachers in the world, the same woman who trained the era's greatest dancers. Audrey worked tirelessly, 6 hours a day, waking before dawn, going to bed exhausted, pushing herself harder than any other student. Her classmates admired her. The teachers noticed her dedication, but they also noticed something else, something she did not want to see. Soon she received devastating news. Marie Rambert called her into her office, served her tea and spoke gently but directly. She was too tall for classical ballet companies. Her feet were too large for standard point shoes. And most importantly, her body, weakened by starvation, did not have the muscle strength necessary for professional ballet. She didn't have the muscle mass. She didn't have the stamina, and she would never have them. The starvation had damaged her body from the inside. It affected her muscular development, weakened her bones. The damage was permanent. "I didn't have anywhere near the technique other girls my age had," Audrey would admit years later, painfully. "I'd lost crucial years of training during the war, and my body could no longer catch up." Audrey left that office in tears. She walked through the streets of London with no direction, crying until she had no tears left. Ballet was all she had ever wanted. It was the only dream that had kept her alive during 5 years of horror. And now that dream was dead. She had to reinvent herself. From ballet, she went to theater. From theater to modeling. From modeling to small film roles. And finally, almost by accident, to Hollywood. But ballet was always her first lost love. Until the very end of her life, she continued practicing at home alone, in front of the bedroom mirror, dancing what she never got to dance on a stage, dancing for no one, dancing for the child she once was, dancing for the dream that died. And maybe you felt that too. When you're finally ready for something, life tells you it's too late, that your body can't, that the dream you protected so carefully through years of pain no longer belongs to you, that the door you waited so long to walk through has closed forever. Audrey felt that with ballet, and she would feel it many more times. Now pay attention, because here comes the first of the four things almost no one dares to talk about. The Munich photograph. In May 1935, Audrey's parents traveled to Germany with Oswald Mosley's fascist delegation. They visited the Brown House in Munich, the Nazi Party headquarters, and there they took a group photograph. In that photo appear the Hepburn Rustins alongside the famous Mitford sisters, Unity Mitford, who belonged to Hitler's inner circle, who dined with him, who adored him publicly, who shot herself when Britain declared war on Germany. Also Pamela Mitford and other prominent British fascists, all smiling, all proud. That photograph sat in a silver frame on Ella van Heemstra's mantelpiece for years. For years. Can you imagine growing up seeing that photo every day? Knowing who those people were, knowing what it meant, wondering why your mother displayed it with pride? When Audrey became famous, Hollywood needed to bury that story. A Nazi scandal would have destroyed her career in the 1950s. Americans would never have accepted a star whose parents admired Hitler. No studio would have hired her. No magazine would have put her on the cover. So they created the legend, the elegant aristocrat, the resistance heroine, the perfect story. And it was true, Audrey was a heroine of the resistance. She did risk her life. She did hide fugitives. She did carry messages for the Allies. But the other part was also true, the Nazi parents, the photo with Hitler, the father imprisoned as an enemy of the state. Audrey carried that secret her entire life. She never spoke about it publicly. When journalists asked about her father, she changed the subject. When they mentioned the war, she spoke about the hunger, never about her parents' beliefs, never about that photo on the mantle. And when she died, her family kept the silence. 30 years of silence until researcher Robert Mattson uncovered everything in 2019. He went through archives, found documents, and the photo came to light. Hollywood's angel had skeletons in the closet, skeletons wearing Nazi uniforms. But what I'm going to tell you now changes everything. Anne Frank and Audrey Hepburn were born only weeks apart in 1929. They lived just 60 kilometers apart during the Nazi occupation. Both were teenagers during the war. Both kept diaries. Both dreamed of the future. Both suffered the horrors of the regime. But there was one fundamental difference. Anne was Jewish. Anne Frank died of typhus in Bergen-Belsen in February 1945, just weeks before the camp was liberated. She was 15 years old. She died never knowing the war was about to end, never knowing her diary would become one of the most widely read books in history. Audrey Hepburn survived to become Hollywood's most iconic star of her generation. When The Diary of Anne Frank became a worldwide phenomenon, Hollywood decided to make a film in 1959. Director George Stevens had one actress in mind, only one Audrey Hepburn. Otto Frank, Anne's father and the sole survivor of the family, wrote personally to Audrey. The letter arrived at her home in Switzerland. Audrey opened it with trembling hands. Otto asked her to portray his daughter on screen. He told her Anne would have been honored that such a beloved actress would play her. He even noted the striking physical resemblance between them as teenagers, the same big eyes, the same hopeful smile. Audrey read the letter. She read it again. She read the diary. She reread it. She marked it with her own hands, underlined passages, wrote notes in the margins, and it destroyed her. I marked where she wrote 5 hostages shot today, Audrey said in an interview years later, voice trembling. That was the day they shot my uncle. The same date, the same horror. And in this child's words, I was reading what was inside me, what is still inside me. This child, locked away, had written a complete account of everything I had lived through, everything I had felt. Audrey refused the role. I was so devastated by it again that I said I couldn't deal with it, she explained. It was a little like it had happened to my sister. In a way, she was my soulmate. She also argued that at 30, she was too old to convincingly play a teenager. But those close to her knew the truth. The trauma was too recent, too real. Too painful. Her biographer Robert Matson believes Audrey suffered survivor's guilt. She survived. Anne Frank did not, and she never understood why. She could never forgive herself for living while Anne died. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. Years later, Audrey would read passages of Anne Frank's diary on stage to raise money for UNICEF. Her voice trembled every time. Tears ran down her cheeks as she read. It was her way of honoring her soul sister without having to relive the trauma on film. That diary marked by Audrey, that page where she noted the day they killed her uncle. That's the second item I promised you at the beginning. And now you understand why it hurt so much. Remember the pattern of abandonment from her father? You'll need it for what comes next. In December 1953, during the British premiere of Roman Holiday, Gregory Peck introduced Audrey to Mel Ferrer. He was an actor and director, 12 years older than she was, twice divorced, father of 4 children from previous marriages. They married in a small private ceremony in Switzerland. From the beginning, colleagues noticed something disturbing. Mel was difficult, controlling, unpleasant. He was jealous of Audrey's fame. He couldn't stand that she was more successful. Couldn't stand that journalists asked about her instead of him. Some believed he tried to use her success to advance his own stagnant career. Her son Sean would later confirm that his father was a difficult, demanding man who regretted losing the relationship every single day of the rest of his life. Remember what Audrey said about her father? That she loved him more than any other man? That his abandonment was the most traumatic event of her life? That she spent years fantasizing he would return? Now look at whom she chose as a husband, an older man, controlling, emotionally distant. Someone who made her feel she was never enough. Someone who criticized her professional decisions, who made her doubt her own talent. Sean expressed it with devastating clarity. She seemed to be looking for someone who was more of a father than a husband. Psychologists have a name for this: trauma repetition. We unconsciously seek relationships that mirror our childhood wounds, as if by reliving them, we could finally heal them. But it rarely works. Audrey was trying to fill the void Joseph Rustin left behind. She was looking for a father, and she chose a man who would hurt her in the same way. During her marriage to Ferrer, rumors of his infidelities were constant. In Hollywood parties, on film sets. Mel denied everything. Audrey's friends told her what they saw. She pretended not to know, but she knew. In response, Audrey had her own affairs. The most notable was with William Holden during the filming of Sabrina in 1954. Holden was 11 years older, married, with 3 children, a legendary actor with a smile that melted hearts. Audrey thought he was the most handsome man she had ever met. She fell deeply, hopelessly in love, the way only someone who has never truly been loved can fall. She wanted to marry him. She imagined a future together, fantasized about a different life. But then she discovered something that changed everything. Holden confessed one night that he had undergone a vasectomy years earlier. He couldn't have children. He could never give her the family she desperately wanted. She ended the relationship that same day. Audrey cried for weeks, but her decision was firm. Her desire to be a mother was stronger than any romantic love, stronger than passion, stronger than desire. She also had an affair with screenwriter Robert Anderson during The Nun story, apparently as revenge for Ferrer's infidelities, a way to balance the scales. Their marriage lasted 14 years of ups and downs, fights and reconciliations, silences and shouting. It ended in divorce in 1968. Ferrer later said with apparent confusion, "I still don't know what the difficulties were." He didn't know why. 14 years of marriage and he didn't know why she left him. That tells you everything you need to know about Mel Ferrer. But that was only the prologue. And this is where the story takes a turn no one expected. 14 years of marriage. And he didn't know why she left him. That tells you everything you need to know about Mel Ferrer. But that was only the prologue. And here is where the story takes a turn no one expected. In 1969, Audrey married Andrea Dotti, an Italian psychiatrist 9 years younger than she was. She met him on a cruise and fell in love quickly. He was charming, sophisticated, said all the right things. He made her laugh. At first, everything seemed perfect. They moved to Rome. They had a son, Luca, in 1970. Audrey practically retired from Hollywood to dedicate herself to her family. She left the stage, left films, left everything to be a mother and a wife. But there was a problem Audrey took years to recognize, a problem that would destroy everything. Dottie was a compulsive womanizer. While Audrey stayed home raising their children, her husband went from nightclub to nightclub across Rome. He was photographed with models, with actresses, with any woman who gave him attention. Italian paparazzi photographed him with more than 200 different women during their marriage. 200. He made no effort to hide it. Magazines published the photos openly. Audrey saw them at newsstands while buying bread for her children. Italian husbands have never been famous for their fidelity, Dottie would say cynically years later, with a smile that froze the blood. Beyond the infidelities, Dottie expected Audrey to play the role of a traditional Italian wife, stay home while he went out, devote herself entirely to the household and the children, never question anything, never protest, smile, and endure. Here comes the second revelation, what her son Sean publicly confessed about that night in 1978, the night that marked her forever. In 1978, Sean Hepburn Ferrer was 18 years old. He came home after an afternoon with friends. The house was silent, too silent. He walked upstairs. His heart was pounding. Something was wrong. He opened the door to his mother's bedroom. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. Audrey was in bed, eyes bloodshot, her gaze empty, a nearly empty bottle of sleeping pills on the nightstand. She had tried to end it all. Sean ran to her, shook her, screamed her name, called the doctors. The next hours were hell ambulances, doctors, questions. When Audrey regained consciousness with swollen eyes and a rough voice, she confessed to her teenage son the harshest truths about Dottie's infidelities. Details no child should ever hear. Humiliations she had buried for years. Nights spent waiting for him to come home. Calls he wouldn't answer. Photos in magazines showing him with other women. Sean would later recall the terrifying duality of his stepfather, how charming he could be in public, and how cruel in private, how his serial adultery destroyed his mother. Dottie, Sean said bitterly, killed that marriage every single day for 10 years. Think about that for a moment. The woman the world saw as the symbol of grace and elegance, swallowing sleeping pills, confessing to her teenage son that she couldn't go on, that she had reached her limit. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad, and no one knew. Audrey kept a flawless public image while she was falling apart inside. Magazines showed perfect smiles. The reality was very different. The divorce came in 1982. After 13 years of marriage, Audrey stayed in Italy so Luca could remain close to his father. And then Sean revealed something that breaks the soul. Dottie never used his visitation rights. He abandoned his son, just as Joseph Rustin had abandoned Audrey. The cycle repeated itself, generation after generation. Maybe you've seen that too. How patterns repeat through families, how wounds we never heal are passed down to our children, how pain finds a way to perpetuate itself. Audrey lived it with her parents, with her husbands, with her children. The best-kept secret about her was that she was sad. She didn't find anything resembling peace until she was 51. Robert Wolders, a Dutch actor, widower. They never married legally, but they lived together for the last 12 years of her life. Audrey introduced him as "my husband Rob" and considered him her soulmate. He was her spiritual twin, a close friend said, the man she wanted to grow old with, the only one who truly understood her. But before we talk about the end, you need to know the greatest pain of her life. And now comes the third revelation, perhaps the most shocking of all. The babies Audrey lost. If there was anything Audrey desired more than fame, more than awards, more than Hollywood's recognition, it was to be a mother. She had waited her whole life to have a family, her son Sean would say years later. It's what she wanted from life, the only thing she really wanted. Everything else was secondary. But the path to motherhood was a nightmare of repeated loss, a torture that lasted decades. Audrey suffered at least 5 miscarriages throughout her life. The first in 1955, shortly after marrying Mel Ferrer. She had barely had time to grow excited about the news, barely had time to dream of names and cribs, when it all ended without explanation, without warning. One day she was pregnant, the next she wasn't. The second, in 1959, was especially brutal. During the filming of The Unforgiven, Audrey was required to ride wild horses. They weren't trained movie horses. They were real, dangerous animals. One threw her, and she fell hard on her back, fracturing 4 vertebrae. Doctors said it was a miracle she could walk at all, but something even worse happened. Something the doctors told her privately. She had lost the baby, a child barely beginning to form. The film almost cost her life. It cost her something worse. The third loss came in 1965. Another dream shattered. Another hospital room. Another night crying in silence. The fourth in 1967. This one was the most devastating of all. She was 6 months pregnant with a girl. She had already chosen a name, already prepared the room, already bought tiny clothes, already felt her kicks, already talked to her every night, and then her body betrayed her. The doctors couldn't explain why. Sometimes it just happens, they told her, as if that were comfort, as if it explained anything. The fifth loss happened in 1974 during her marriage to Dottie, when she had already lost hope of having more children, when she had resigned herself to the idea that Sean and Luca would be her only babies. I know the second loss, at 6 months, was especially difficult, Sean said, pain heavy in his voice. It was a baby girl, and she was going to be my older sister. Mom had everything ready. I had felt her move inside her belly. Sean explained that the cultural taboo around speaking of such things added an extra layer of shame and sadness. We came from a culture of, you must move on, you must keep going, don't talk, don't cry, act as if nothing happened. And Mom moved forward, but the pain never left. Audrey herself would later say something that tears the heart apart. My miscarriages were more painful for me than anything else, including my parents' divorce and my father's disappearance. Think about that. More painful than her father abandoning her. More painful than growing up with a cold mother. More painful than the war. More painful than starvation. More painful than almost dying of hunger. 5 times. 5 babies who never got to be born. 5 funerals that never took place. 5 names never spoken aloud. 5 cribs left empty. Maybe you too know what it's like to carry something you've never told anyone. Losses kept in silence. Pain you don't share because you think no one would understand. Tears you cry in secret. Audrey carried 5 of them, and the world saw only her smile. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. When Sean was finally born in 1960 after 2 losses, Audrey wrote to a friend, "Sean is truly a dream, and I find it hard to believe he is really ours forever." Ours forever, as if she feared losing him too. Those 2 children became the center of her universe. For them, she left Hollywood. For them, she endured unhappy marriages. For them, she redefined what success meant. But there's something else you need to know before the end. Audrey Hepburn, the woman the American Film Institute named the 3rd greatest female star in American cinema, never thought she was beautiful. Her son Luca revealed to Vanity Fair that Audrey described her iconic face as a good mixture of defects. She thought her nose was too big, her feet too big, that she was too thin, that her bust was too small. She looked in the mirror and said, "I don't understand why people see me as beautiful. I don't understand why." Those words haunted her all her life. She didn't understand why her father abandoned her. She didn't understand why men cheated on her. She didn't understand why she lost so many babies. She didn't understand why people saw her as beautiful. And now brace yourself, because what comes next is the reason for telling this entire story. In her final years, Audrey finally found a purpose that filled the emptiness. She dedicated herself entirely to UNICEF as a goodwill ambassador. She traveled to Ethiopia in 1988. What she saw changed her forever. Children with swollen bellies from malnutrition. Mothers holding babies who weighed less than dolls. Huge eyes and skeletal faces. "It was like looking into a mirror of my past," she said afterwards. "I saw the child I was during the war. I saw the hunger that almost killed me." She traveled to Turkey, Central America, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Somalia, bringing aid and global attention to starving children. Children dying while the world looked away. Children no one wanted to see. She had been saved from starvation as a child by humanitarian organizations after the war. So now she used her fame to save other children. I was saved by UNICEF when I was a child, she said in every speech. I received food, clothing, medicine. Without those organizations, I would have died in Holland in 1945. Now it's my turn to give back. It wasn't PR work. It wasn't photo ops. Audrey stepped into refugee camps, sat in the dust with mothers, held dying children, cried with them. She couldn't save them all, but she could make the world look. In September 1992, she returned from an exhausting trip to Somalia. She had witnessed a devastating famine, the worst she had ever seen. Children with swollen bellies, mothers crying over tiny bodies. The horror she had lived as a child repeated in another continent half a century later. During the trip, she began to feel severe abdominal pain. She ignored it. There was work to do, children to save, speeches to give. She knew her own body, Luca explained later. She knew it was serious, but she didn't want to stop working. In November 1992, Audrey finally traveled to Los Angeles for medical exams. The exploratory surgery revealed the worst possible news: cancer, pseudomyxoma peritoni, a rare cancer that begins in the appendix. So rare it affects only around 1,000 people a year worldwide. So aggressive it is almost never detected in time. The cancer had already spread throughout her abdomen. It was inoperable. There was nothing doctors could do. They gave her 3 months to live. When Sean told his mother the news, she simply looked out the window. The California sun shone through the glass. Outside, life continued. Cars drove by. People walked. The world didn't know Audrey Hepburn was dying. How disappointing, she said calmly. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't fall apart. How disappointing, as if death were just another disappointment in a life full of them. As if she were already used to things not turning out the way she hoped. And now we arrive at the fourth and final revelation, the one I promised you at the beginning. If you've made it this far, this part is for you. The gifts of her last Christmas. Audrey devoted her remaining strength to planning Christmas. It was her favorite holiday. At Christmas lunch, she gave each loved one a gift to remember her by winter coats. One for Givenchy, one for Sean, one for Robert Wolders. Think of me when you wear it, she told them as she handed them over with trembling hands. Think of me when you wear it. That night before going to sleep, she told Robert, it was the most beautiful Christmas I ever had. The best kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. But on her last Christmas, she finally found peace. On Wednesday, January 20th, 1993 at 7 p.m., Audrey Hepburn died in her sleep. She was 63 years old. Tiffany stores around the world placed her photograph in their windows. A simple black sign with white letters, Audrey Hepburn, our friend, Holly Golightly, 1929-1993. The windows that normally displayed diamonds and jewels now showed only her face. The woman who made their store famous. The woman who had breakfasted in front of their displays in Hollywood's most iconic film. Elizabeth Taylor, her friend and sometimes rival, said with tears in her eyes, God has a very beautiful angel now. 4 days after her death, her funeral was held in the small stone church in the Swiss village where she lived, a church where Audrey had finally found peace in her last years. Among the attendees were Roger Moore, Alain Delon, Hubert de Givenchy, and thousands of strangers who had traveled from all over the world just to say goodbye. There were more than 25,000 people lining the streets of this tiny Swiss village, Sean recalled with amazement. As far as the eye could see, cars were parked everywhere, full of people wanting to pay their respects. It was like a rock concert. I had never seen anything like it. The whole world mourned a woman who never understood why she was loved so much. And here is a final painful irony, one that would have destroyed Audrey if she could have seen it. She left a handwritten will. In her elegant script, she promised her sons, Sean and Luca, an equal division of her possessions. 50-50. Everything divided equally, just as she always wanted them to be treated. But she didn't specify who should receive what. She made no lists. She assigned no specific items. She trusted her sons would work it out among themselves, as brothers, as family. She was wrong. The result was decades of legal disputes, lawyers, lawsuits, courts. In 2015, more than 20 years after her death, Sean sued Luca over the division of items stored in a Los Angeles warehouse, photos from film sets, original movie posters, period clothing, jewelry she had worn on red carpets, awards, studio scripts with her handwritten notes. They couldn't agree on what equal division meant. Equal number of objects, equal dollar value, equal sentimental value. To give an idea of what was at stake, the little black dress Audrey wore in the opening scene of Breakfast at Tiffany's, the most famous dress in film history, sold at Christie's in 2006 for $920,000. $920,000 for a dress. In 2017, things got even worse. Sean was sued by the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund, the charity he himself had founded in her honor. He was accused of self-benefiting conduct, of using his mother's name for his own financial gain. Audrey Hepburn's sons fighting over her legacy, over the objects she left behind, over the money that could be made from her memory. She who only wanted a family. She who left Hollywood for her children. She who endured unhappy marriages to give them stability. She who spent her last years saving starving children instead of making movies. Her children ended up in court, fighting over dresses and photographs. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad. And perhaps if she could see us now, she still wouldn't understand. She wouldn't understand why her sons can't share, why they fight over objects when she gave them all her love. She wouldn't understand why the world still talks about her 30 years after her death, why millions watch her films, why her image remains iconic. She wouldn't understand why millions see her as the face of beauty when she only saw a good mixture of defects. A nose too big, feet too big. Today, Sean Hepburn Ferrer is 65. He is married 4 times and has 3 children. He runs the Audrey Hepburn Society for UNICEF, continuing his mother's humanitarian work. Luca Dotti is 55. He lives in Rome with his wife Domitilla and their children. He is the president of the Audrey Hepburn Children's Fund. Despite their legal disputes, both brothers share one desire: that the world remember their mother as the humanitarian who saved thousands of lives. Audrey Hepburn was not perfect. She was profoundly human. A little girl abandoned by her fascist father, a teenager who nearly starved to death in the war, a resistance heroine who risked her life at 14, a woman who lost 5 babies and kept going, a wife betrayed twice, a mother who loved her children more than anything, a humanitarian who dedicated her final years to saving starving children, and a person who never, not once, could see her own light. The best-kept secret about Audrey was that she was sad, and yet she chose to give light. She chose to get up each day and create beauty. She chose to smile even when her heart hurt. She chose to help others even though no one had helped her when she needed it most. That is what makes Audrey Hepburn extraordinary. Not her beauty, not her films, not her dresses, but her ability to transform pain into something beautiful. If this story reached you, share it. Subscribe so more people can discover the real Audrey, not the Hollywood myth, but the woman with all her pain and all her light. Next week, another story Hollywood tried to bury, another icon hiding a private hell, another secret no one dared to tell until now.